Hey there, how's it going everyone? In this video, we are going to be building a simple web application using Django and then using Auth0 as our authentication tool. In this case, we are not going to rely so much on the Django default authentication functionality. We're going to be using Auth0 to authenticate and be able to log in and log out users. So Auth0 is a tool that can help us to carry out things such as authentication, that's checking if users are who they claim to be, and authorization, that is giving roles to users so that they be able to do things within our application. So before we start anything, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Sally Jonathan, and this is my YouTube channel. This YouTube channel, I teach programming and related things. So I'm going to be creating this Django application. And if you're new to this channel, please go ahead and leave a like and also comment about what you think about Auth0 and the video as well. And without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing is going to be to create our virtual environment. I'm going to create my virtual environment in Python -m. So this is basically calling a module as a command. So I'm calling them, which is what is going to create our virtual environment. We're going to call them and then going to specify that our virtual environment is going to be located in the env folder. So after doing this, I am going to activate this virtual environment and then install what we need for this project. So we are also going to be using environment variables in this project since we shall have some things that need to be kept separate. So we are going to be installing our dependencies. Let's first wait for our virtual environment to be created. So once it's created, I'm going to go ahead and um, activate this virtual environment source. And in this case, it's env, then script, since I'm on a Windows system, and then activate. So after doing that, the next thing is going to be to install Django. I'm going to install Django with pip install Django. Now, after installing Django, we shall need to create a project as well as to create a sample app that we are going to be working with in this case. So let's wait for Django to be installed. So after Django has been installed, we are going to create our Django project within our folder. So within this Django Auth0 folder, I'm going to create our Django project. Django has finished installing, so I'm going to go ahead and do that by saying Django admin. So I'm going to say Django admin. So this is going to be Django admin start project. So I'm going to call start project, and then it's going to be let's say I'm going to just call it web app. This is going to be web app, and then I'll say dot, meaning that you want our manage.py to be within our folder. We want our project to be within this folder. So when I run this, it's going to create our Django project, and we shall have our manage.py file just outside here. So after that, I'm going to create a requirements.txt file where I'm going to sort of write every requirement that we are having for this project. So to do that, I'm going to say pip pip freeze. So I'm going to use pip freeze, then -r, then requirements. Actually, it's going to just point to requirements. Sorry for that. So it's going to be requirements.txt. Now this is going to write all our requirements for this project within our txt file. Now we have been able to install Django and its dependencies within this project. So let's check whether our Django installation has been successful. So to do that, I'm just going to run python manage.py run server, and this is going to show us that our Django application is successful. This is going to run our server, our web server at localhost 8000. I'm going to open this within our browser. So I'm going to open this within our browser. So I'm going to go to this, and we see that our server has been opened at localhost 8000. So you also see the message that install worked successfully. Congratulations. And they're saying this because we have debug equals true. So we have been able to install Django and create our Django project, as well as to run our Python server. And the next thing we're going to do is to be able to get our credentials from Auth0. So we shall need a client ID, a client secret, as well as a domain for our application. So we are going to head over to Auth0. We're going to go to Auth0, and then within Auth0, I'm going to log into my account. So I'm going to log in. I'm going to come to Auth0, then I'm going to log in. So this should take me to the login page. So I'm going to continue with my Google account. So I most of the times use my Google account. So I'm going to log in with Google and then head over to my dashboard and create a new application. So you need to go to my account, the one that I want to log in with. I'll go to Sally Jonathan. So we expect to be redirected to a dashboard from which we shall be able to create an application with credentials. So now we are on our dashboard on Auth0, and the next thing we shall do is to create our application. So we are going to go to the application section, and then we're going to go to where we see applications. So right here we have this create application button. So I currently have some applications I've been using. So I need to go ahead and create an application. So now we have different types of applications. Here we have native, that's for mobile applications, and then we have single page web applications, regular applications, machine learning applications. So in this case, I'm going to be using a regular web application. I'm going to select regular web application and then say create. And right now we are having our web application created. So we can be able to check the technology we are using for our project. So in this case, we are using Django. So we can also see that they have a tutorial for us on how to configure our app, and this can be quite helpful. I'll leave the link in the description. So I'll go back to our application and then head over to the settings of our app. So I'll go back to the app we just created, which is my app, which is a regular web application. So within our settings, we can be able to acquire the different credentials for our app. So we can even rename our app. So I'm going to call this, let's say, Django Auth demo. So I'm just going to say Django Auth0 demo in this case. After doing this, I'm going to copy the various credentials that we may need specific for our authentication to work. The first thing I'm going to copy is our domain. So you are required to get your own credentials. So I need to copy my domain, so which is that domain, and I'll come right within our project. So I'm going to create an env file. So I'm going to say new file, then call that file.env. So this file is where I'm going to store the various environment variables, things that you do not want to expose to the public. So I'm going to create an app domain. So I'm going to call this variable the app domain, and it's going to be having the value of the domain you've got from Auth0. After setting this domain, I'm also going to create another variable which I'm going to call the app client ID. So it's going to be our app client ID. Then I'll go to Auth0 and then copy that client ID. So I'm going to copy this client ID, and then I'll also use the app client secret. So I'll come and say app client secret. So the auto completion is because I'm using GitHub Copilot. So let me first disable it. So just disable it, and after disabling it, we need to just work without it because I'm not relying on AI. So I'll come and copy my client secret from 0 and then paste it here. Now within our .env, we have the various environment variables that we're going to be using for our project. After doing this, I'm going to go ahead and save. I'm going to install Python decouple as well as social app Django, and we are going to see how those are going to work for our project. So to do that, I'm going to stop our server, and then I'm going to go up. I'm going to go and install social app Django and Python decouple, which I'm going to explain in a minute. I'm going to say pip install social app Django. Also going to install Python decouple. And this is going to install this within our virtual environment. So I'm saying an error, no app found. This is not found. So to do that, I'm going to first search for it. So I'm going to say social app Django. So let's try to see. So this is Python social app Django. So let's try to see. So let's try to see this. So I'm going to head over to the GitHub page, see social app Django, how to install it. So pip install social app Django, social auth app Django. So let's try to see this. So this is social auth app Django. So you're going to head over here and install it with pip. So I'm going to just correct this. So social auth app Django. So I'm going to correct this with social auth app Django and then Python decouple. This is going to install our requirements and then we shall also add them to our requirements file. And then we see. So what social app Django does is to wrap on our existing Django authentication functionality and then add functionality such as logging in with emails, logging in with GitHub and Amazon and the other external parties that are not attached to our application. So if you may want to log in with an email, log in with Facebook, log in with Twitter and stuff like that, social auth app Django helps us to do this uh, with Django as it wraps on the existing Django functionality. Once this is done, we are going to go ahead and update our settings file. So let's wait for this to be done. So this has been done. Now the next step is going to be to uh, update our settings file within our project. So I'm going to go ahead and open our settings file. So I'm going to go to our project and then open settings. And this is where I'm going to update our settings file. So the first thing I'm going to do is to import uh, Python decouple. So I'm going to import decouple by saying from decouple import. I'm going to import config, and this config object is going to help us to be able to access the various environment variables that we've set. So social app Django is going to be making use of some variables we're going to set within our settings, and these are going to be got by using our Python decouple. So let's go ahead and try to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is to add social app Django to our installed app. So I'm going to first close this and go to our installed apps list. So this installed apps list is going to have our installed apps. I'm going to add the social app Django. So I'm just going to come and say social. I'm going to call this social Django. And after this, I'm going to access the various environment variables that we need for our social app Django to work with our Auth0. So to do that, I'm going to come down here and say this is going to be social. So this is going to be social auth. Going to be trailing slash. So it's going to be trailing slash. Sorry for this. So it's going to be trailing slash. And this is going to be equal to false, meaning that our auth0 is going to just ignore the trailing slash in every URL we shall use. The next variable is going to be our auth0 domain. So I'm going to call this by saying it's going to be social auth, then say it's going to be our auth0 domain. So this is going to be our auth0 domain, and this will have the value of the domain that we got from Auth0. So this is the domain that we got from Auth0. We named it our app ID. So we're going to use Python decouple to get this variable env file. So to do this, I am going to come and say config. So give me for that. So I'm going to say config, and then I'm going to specify app domain. And once this is done, the next thing is going to be to set up our client ID. So to do that, I'm going to say social auth. Then this is going to be our auth0. So in this case, we are going to name it our auth0 key. So then the value of this is going to be the value of our client ID. So I need to go and see the value of that. So I'm going to come and say app client ID. So I'm going to come, and this is going to be our config. So this I call app client ID. So the app, the social auth, the social auth0's key is going to be the having the value of our app client ID. We need to set it, and the next thing is going to be to set our auth0 secret, the client secret. So to do that, I'm going to come and say auth social auth, and this is going to be auth0 client secret. So this is going to be our auth0 secret. So I'm just going to say auth0 secret, and this is going to be config. So I'm going to set it as our app client secret. So after doing this, I'm going to go back to our .env and having see the variable. So this is my app domain, which I set here, and the app client ID and the app client secret is set. So we have been able to set this up. So the next thing we're going to go and set is the Auth0 scope. So the Auth0 scope refers to those information, to the extra information that you may need from these third-party services from which we are getting to authenticate. So we may need the email or a profile picture from that external service, and we can get those by using the scope. So we are going to specify a variable called the social auth0. So this is going to be our scope, and it's going to be equal to a list of this specific information that you may want. So the first thing is going to be the open ID or the user ID in this case. So I'm going to access the open ID, and then we may also want the profile. So I'm going to say profile, and then we may also want to access the email of that current user. So after doing this, the next thing we're going to set up is our authentication backends. So we are going to set up our authentication backends. Since we don't have any authentication backends, we're going to add them inside our project. So I'm going to go right here and say authentication backends. This is going to be another variable. So this is going to be our authentication backends. This is going to be equal to a list of these backends. So I'm going to add these backends as going to add the first authentication backend I'm going to add is the one for the social auth. So I'm going to say a social or then I'm going to call dot backends. So this is going to be backends then dot auth0. So auth0 and dot this is going to be the dot auth. It's going to be auth0 auth. So this is going to be auth2. And this is our authentication backend from Django Social Auth app. So after doing this, the next thing is going to be to also add Django default, the model backend for Django. So to do this, I'm going to say it's going to be Django dot contrib dot auth then dot backends dot going to be the model backend. After doing this, I will also have to set up our login URL and our logout URL as well as our login redirect URL. So these URLs are the ones that are going to help us to log in and to log out. I'm going to go and set this up. So I'm going to go down below and set those up. So I'm going to say login URL going to be equal to. So I'm going to say slash login slash, and then this is going to be auth0. You may set it to what you want. In this case, I'm using this as my login URL. I'm going to also specify the login redirect URL, which is going to be the URL I'm going to redirect to when I log in. So I'm going to say login, sorry for this. So this is going to be capital. So I say login redirect URL. So for now, we're just going to redirect to the slash or the root URL on our project. And then also log out and redirect to that same URL. So I'm going to say login redirect, log out redirect URL as also slash. So we have been able to update our project, and the next thing is going to be to create the various routes and carry out our authentication backend. So to do this, I am going to first correct this login URL. If you notice, it was login slash auth0. So I had happened to add the slash to specify that slash login slash auth0. Now the next thing we're going to do is to create our Python app in which we're going to write our view functions and our URLs. So to do that, I'm going to come just down here and say Python py start app. Then the app I'm going to start is called my site. After creating this app, the next thing is going to be registering this app within our settings file. So I'm going to come to settings.py within our installed apps. I'm going to come within our installed apps, and I'm going to add this app, which is going to be our, so this app is going to be our my site. So I'm going to just say my site. So comma then social journal. After doing this, the next thing is going to be to implement our first view function for the my site app we've created. We're going to close this and go to my site, then views. And within views is where we are going to create our various views. So I'm going to create the index view. So I'm going to say def index. I'm going to take in our request object, and then it's going to return an HTML template. So we're going to make use of the render function. So I'm going to say render. This is going to take in our request object, and then the template we want to render in this case is going to be index.html. After we've done this, I'm going to create a templates folder in which we're going to put our template index.html. So to do this, I am going to come and create a new folder which I'm going to call templates. And within this template folder, I'm going to create HTML files. So I'm going to create a new file which I'm going to call base. Sorry for this. So this new file is going to be our base.html. Now this base.html is what is going to have the layout of our entire application. So I'm going to use this shift 1, and it's going to help us to create a boilerplate HTML code. So I'm going to call this Django Auth0. So this is going to be a Django Auth0 demo. After this, I am going to create this as our base template. All pages are going to inherit from it. So I'm going to create a simple header that's going to have our links. So in this header, I'm going to say if user is authenticated. So this is when you have a user who is logged in. We are going to have different URLs from when the user is logged out. So in this case, we're going to have one that is going to make us to log out, and we are going to have another URL that's going to help us to access the profile. That's when we are logged in. So also create another anchor tag, and this anchor tag is going to have a profile. Now after we've done this, the next thing is going to be to specify that if a user is not logged in, we are going to provide the URL for them to log in. So you're going to come and say else. Then I'll say that this is going to be login. So now after doing this, let's try to render this template on our front end. So to do that, we have to first write URLs that are going to map this view function, the index view function, to a specific URL. To do that, I'm going to go to my site, and on my site, I'm going to create a simple module which I'm going to call urls.py. Now this is going to have the various URL patterns that we are going to register within our app. So I'm going to do this by saying from Django.urls, we are going to import path. Now this path object is what is going to create our URLs and then map our URLs to a specific function. So we shall need to also import our views. So I'm going to say from dot, we're going to import our views. So now after importing our views, the next thing is going to be to create a list of URL patterns which are going to be mapped onto these view functions. We're going to say URL patterns, and it's going to be equal to a list of URL patterns. So we're going to come and then specify the first path. So the first path is going to be the index route, and then it's going to take in our index view function. So we need to say views dot index, and then we are going to name this our index. So we're going to give it a name of index. After doing this, I'm going to save. And the next thing is going to be to write our index.html file. Remember, I only created the base.html file and it only has a header. So let's add a block content where the section where the other parts of the application are going to extend. To do this, I'm going to first delete that. Then after come and write the blog in which are going to write all the content for our application. We're going to do this by writing blog. If you're wondering the auto completion of my tags, so I'm using an extension called Janeiro, which you can get by using the extensions tab. So this is Janeiro. So it's the extension I'm using. Right from that, we are going to come back here and I'm going to say block body and then end block body. And after doing this, I am going to come and save this, then create our index.html file. Now within our index.html file, we are going to extend the layout, the base layout of our application. So I'm going to say extend, and then this is going to be extends base.html. Then we're going to write all our code for this template within the block tags. So I'm going to say block, and this is going to be body and then block body. So for now, let's just add a simple h1, and this h1 is going to have the text hello, welcome to the application. So I'm going to save this and let's try to run our app and see. So hoping that we've written our URL patterns, and the next thing is going to be to register this within our project, something I was about to forget. So I'm going to go back and then go to our web app project. Then within our URLs, I'm going to simply import the URLs from an external module. So to do this, I'm going to use the include function. So I'm going to say include, and then when I come inside here, I'm going to say path and then specify the URL. So every URL that follows the route will be having URLs that belong to the my site app. So to do this, I'm going to say include my site dot URLs. After doing this, I'm going to save and let's try to run our application to see whether our logic is working. So I'm going to run our app by saying python money.py run server. And hoping everything is working, we see that our application is running. We have unapplied migrations, which are going to apply in a second. So we are seeing our application is running at localhost 8000. So let's try to go that site. So I need to close these tabs, and then when you go to localhost 8000, you see that our application is working, and now we have our login URL that we haven't yet worked with. Now to include our login URL, I'm going to go back to our HTML template and add all the URLs that we haven't yet added. So to do that, I'm going to go back to my VS Code and Within our base.html, I'm going to add the logout URL. In this case, it's slash. Then we also have the profile URL. We haven't yet worked on this, but I can include it. So I'll say profile. And then for the login URL, we specified that inside our settings.i. So if I go down this side, let me this. When I go back to the side, when you see our login URL, it's slash login slash auth0. So if I go back to our base.html, I'll say slash login slash auth0. So now the next task is going to be to work on our profile view function. So to work on this view function for profile, I'm going to first install something I forgot to install. So I need to install a package called Python JAWS. So JAWS standing for JavaScript Object Signing and Encryption. So this is going to be necessary for application to work with Auth0. So to do that, I'm going to pull up my terminal and stop the server with Ctrl+C and then say pip install. So I'm going to install JAWS, and this is going to install Python JAWS within our virtual environment. So now that JAWS is installed, the next thing is going to be to implement our route for the profile. So to do that, I'm going to go back to our vis.py. So I'm going to close that and go back to our vis. So I'm going to implement the profiles route. So I'm going to say def, and in this case, I'm going to say index. Let me call this profile. So I'm going to call this profile and then pass in the request object. So the first thing we shall need to access in this case is going to be the user who is logged in. So we want to provide a profile for the user who is currently logged into our application. So to do that, we're going to create a variable called user, and it's going to be the user who has made the request. So to do this, I'm going to say user is going to be equal to request dot user. Now, as you know, Django always keeps the user who is currently using the application within the request object, and you can be able to access that by using request.user. And after doing this, we are going to get the auth0 user, and this is the user who is currently logged in with auth0. We're going to have access to this by using the user we have got from the request object. So to do that, I'm going to say uh, auth0 user is going to be equal to our user, and then I'm going to say dot. So this is going to be our social Django user. So we're going to get our social, and this is going to be our social auth user. Then what you're going to get is the user who is currently using the auth0. So to do this, we're going to say get, and then we shall specify the provider for that authentication as auth0. Now, after doing this, the next thing we may want is the data of this user. So to get this data, I'm going to create a simple dictionary that's going to have uh, the various data for this currently logged in user. So to do that, I'm going to say user data. User data is going to be a dictionary. So this dictionary is going to have different data that this user is going to have. So for example, we may want to access the user ID. So I may say user ID. And then the user ID in this case is going to be our auth user, auth0 user, then dot UID. The next thing we may want to access is the first name of the current user. So we may say, um, this is going to be the name, and this name may be the user. So we may say user dot username, or let's say auth user. So we may say auth0 user dot first name. And the next thing we may need is the picture of the currently logged in user. So we may say picture is going to be auth0 user dot, and this is going to be the extra data. So we're going to get this from the extra data. So this is going to be extra data, and then it's going to be extra data, and then we shall need Now all we have to do is to create a response that's going to return all this data and the HTML template that is going to show our profile. So to do this, I'm going to just come and say return and render. So we're going to say request, and then we're going to specify the HTML template. So we're going to return profile.html, and then we're going to specify the data we need within our context. So I'm going to create our context here. So I'm going to say context. So this context is going to be a dictionary, and we are going to specify our user data. So we want to return our user data as a JSON object, or we can show to our front end. So I'm going to say that we may want our user data to be equal to a JSON object. So I'm going to go and import JSON. I'm going to say import JSON, and then I'm going to come and say JSON dot dumps. Then we shall pass in our user data. So I'm going to say user data, and we shall indent it to 4. So I'm going to say indent going to be equal to 4. After doing that, the next thing we may want to have is the auth0 user. So I will also specify that as auth0 user. Then this is going to be our user. So I'm going to say auth0 user. So after doing this, I'm going to just include the context within our render method, and then close it. So I'm going to run this file again and see if we have any errors. So I need to come and say Python manage.py run server. So we are going to run this and see if we have any errors. So now, since the server does not have any errors, the next thing is going to be to create the URL for this specific user profile view. So I'm going to go to our urls.py and then create another URL. So we specified within our base.html that our profile URL is going to be /profile. So I'm going to go to views, and I mean URLs, and in URLs I'm going to say sorry for this. I'm going to say path, and within here I'm going to say that we need a profile URL. This is going to be /profile, and then I'm going to say this is going to be under views dot profile, and then we can give this a name of, let's say, I'm going to save this. And when I save this, the server is going to run. So after doing this, the next thing is going to be to run our migrations. I'm going to Ctrl C, and after doing this, I'm going to run Python manage.py migrate to make our database migrations. So this is going to uh, migrate all the existing migrations that Social Django added to our Django application. After doing this, let's try to test our URL. So I'm going to say Python manage.py run server. So when I go to our login URL, so I'm going to go and test our app. So I'm going to refresh this. So when I go to login, so you see that we haven't yet implemented this login URL. So it's supposed to redirect us to the login, and we'll be able to log in as well as to sign out and redirect to the /index. So let's look into how to do that. So let's fix our login URL. I'm going to go back to our Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to add another URL configuration. So this URL configuration is the one that's going to help us and add the login auth0 route. So to do that, I'm going to say path, and then I specify that this is going to be on the URL of our root URL for our project. So after this, I'm going to import include, and which I already included here. So I imported include. So I'm going to say this is going to include social Django.url. So I'm going to import the social Django URLs that are going to help us to log in with auth0. So I'm going to say social Django.urls, and I'm going to save this. Now after saving this, I'm going to go back to our application and to our root URL and refresh, try to log in again. And in this case, we see we have no module named social core.backend. And I think that mistake is within our settings.py. So I'm going to go back to our settings.py and our authentication backend. I'm going to fix this by adding the S. And when I save, our server is going to restart again. Now when I refresh, you see that we are having a key error at login. So this is within just.py. So did I install the right tool? So let's see. The error we are having here is, let's actually check it from our terminal. So it's invalid syntax, and I think we installed the wrong tool. So what I'm going to do is to check out Python JAWS and see how they install it. So I'm going to go and search for Python JAWS on the GitHub. Then we see that we actually have to say Python JAWS. We install JAWS instead. So to do this, I'm going to stop this server. What I'm going to do is to say pip install Python. Actually, let me first uninstall JAWS. So I'm going to say pip uninstall JAWS. So this is going to remove JAWS. So I'm going to say yes. And after installing JAWS, uninstalling JAWS, I'm going to install JAWS. So I'm going to say pip install Python JAWS. And once you run this, we expect it's going to install JAWS and get rid of the error we've been having. So let's see if this run. So after doing this, I'm going to pip freeze this to our requirements file. So I'm going to pip freeze requirements.txt, and it's going to be added to our requirements.txt. Now let's run our server again. So I'm going to say python manage.py and server. So when I go back to our app, I'm going to go back to our root URL, and let's expect that this time things are going to work out. So if I log in, it's supposed to redirect to our, so we see that our callback URL has mismatched. We are currently having an error where we are being told that our callback URL mismatches the redirect URL. So we can be able to see this URL. So I'm going to inspect our URL. So I'm going to copy this URL. And what I specifically want from this URL is the redirect URL. Once I get that redirect URL, I'll be able to set our callback URL within our application settings on Auth0. I'm going to copy this URL and go back this side. So I'm just going to copy paste it here for now. And what I need to investigate is a redirect URL. If I go to the redirect URL parameter, I have the redirect URL as HTTP, and this is on localhost 8000 and /complete/auth0. I'm going to go to our application on Auth0 and try to change this app so that we can be able to set up our login functionality working well. So I'm going to first remove this. So I'm going to this save. Our server is going to restart. And when I go back to our browser, I am going to go to our application details. And within our application details, I'll go to allowed callback URL. Sorry for this. I'm going to remove this. When I go back to our allowed callback URLs, I'm going to just set http// and say localhost. This is going to be 8000 /complete/auth0. So hoping that everything is working, we are going to save this setting. So I'm going to come and save this setting. I'm going to click on the Save Changes button, and you are being notified that our changes have been saved successfully. Now, once this is done, we are going to go back and test our application to see if our login functionality is now working. I'm going to go back to our URL and try to refresh our application. So I'm going to go back to our root URL. And when I log in this time, we expect a login form to be displayed. So let's see what. So now we're seeing that we are being redirected to our we are now logged in since we have these URLs only being displayed on log. So let me try using this in an incognito window to see if we shall be logged in. So I'm going to open up an incognito window and go to localhost 8000. This is going to open up our app. And when I go to the login, and let's see what's going to happen. So in this case, we see that our login form has been presented to us. So in this login form, we can provide login credentials that we use on Auth0, or we can be able to even log in with our Google account. So let me try logging in with a Google account. So this is going to redirect me to a Google account. So I'm going to log in with a Google account of mine. So I'm going to say, I'm going to just put in a random Google account and then log in. So after, this is going to redirect us to our profile page. So we're seeing that authorize app, and when we accept, this is going to redirect us to our app, to the redirect URL that we specified. So let's see how this is going to work. So we currently see that we are now having hello, welcome to the application. And when you realize you have in our logout route and our profile route, let me try to maximize this. So when we see we have the logout route and the profile route. So this is currently showing us that we have been successful in implementing our login functionality using Auth0. So the next thing we may want to do is to create a logout URL that's going to help us to log out of Auth0. So let's go ahead and try to do that. Now that our login functionality is working, let us try to implement the logout. But before we do that, let's first implement the profile route. So if you can realize, when you click on the profile route, it shows that the template does not exist, and yet we created a view function for this. So let's go ahead and create a template that's going to bring the user that's currently logged into our app. So to do this, I'm going to go back and create this template. So I'm going to go back and in templates, I'm going to create a new file, which I'm going to call profile.html. So if I go back to profile, we see that we are having an empty profile page. So let's go ahead and add some data in here. I'm going to say extends, this is going to extend its layout from page.html. And then I'm going to add a block content. So I'm going to say block body. And after doing this, I am going to come and then specify. So we want the get the information of the currently logged in user. Now to do this, I'm going to simply get the information from our context. So I'm going to go to views.py, and within the view function for profile, we see that our context is having our user data as well as the OAuth user. So we're currently logged in with our email address, and the information we're going to get is from our email address. Let's try to do this. I'm going to go back to profile. I'm going to create a simple image. I'm going to create a simple image, which is img, and it's going to have a source of our picture that comes from our email. So what I'm going to do is to say auth0 user, then dot extra data. So in this case, we want to access the picture. So I'll say picture. After doing this, I am going to come and say out. So if we don't have it, I'll just say image, and let's specify that width to just be 50 for now. And then you may want to also call the user data. So when I save this, I'm going to go back to our URL, and we currently see that we can be able to obtain the data of the user who is currently logged in. So I'm logged in with my email, and this is the profile picture of my email, and this is the current user information that is got from our email. So now we have the different information from our email. So let's go ahead and we can be able to create the logout function or the logout view function. So let's go ahead and work on that. We can now successfully view our profile. So the next thing is going to be to implement the route that logs us out. So let's go ahead and work on this. So to do that, I'm going to go to our VS Code, and within our vis.py, we're going to implement a view function that's going to log us out. So we are having two current situations. We can log out of the app or log out of Auth0. So in this case, we're going to be doing both. So I have this URL that's going to log us out and return to it's actually going to log us out of both the app and Auth0. So let's go ahead and implement this. So to do this, I'm going to just write a simple route. So I'm going to say def. This is going to be a view function called logout. I'm going to take in the request object. Now it's going to log the user out of Django. So to log out user out of Django, we shall need the logout function from Django. So I'm going to import it. I'm going to say from Django dot contrib dot auth. I'm going to import logout. And after importing logout, the next thing is going to be to log out a user out of this session. So I'm going to come and do this, and I'm going to just simplify this by saying I'm going to import this as Django logout so that I don't mistake it as a view function. I'm going to come this side down in the view function and then say it's going to be Django logout. So we shall log our user out of the current session. So we shall pass in the request object. And now after, we are going to make use of our domain, our client ID, and then we shall also specify a URL to return to. We're going to make use of this current URL that's going to redirect us to our root URL when we are done getting out of Auth0, like logging out of Auth0. So to do this, I'm going to come and say going to first get our domain. So I'm going to say domain is going to be equal to. So I'm going to import Python decouple. I'm going to come and say from decouple, I'm going to import config. And then after that, I'll just come and say config. So if you remember, we set our app domain as app domain in our .env. We also set our client ID. So I'll set the client ID to config. So this is going to be app client ID. So this is going to be our client ID. And then we also we are going to set the return to a URL we are going to return to after logging out. So in this case, it's going to be HTTP localhost. It's going to be localhost 8000. So then we are going to just redirect to that. So I'm going to import HTTP redirect from Django. So I'm going to say from Django, I'm going to say from Django.http. I'm going to import HTTP response. This is going to be redirect. Now, after doing this, I'm going to come and return a redirect to this URL. So I'm going to come and say return HTTP response redirect, and then I'll specify the URL as this URL. So I'll just come and say this is going to be our URL. So we're going to just pass it in here. So say redirect to this. And after doing this, we are going to create the URL configuration for this specific view function. So I'll save, then go back to our URLs, and then I'll create the URL configuration. So this is going to be logging out, then to be slash logout, then the view function is going to be views dot logout, and then I can give it a name of, let's say, logout. So when I save this, hoping that our server is going to run, so it's running. So when I go back to base.html, I change this to logout, so it's going to be able to log us out. So when I save, I'll go back to our front end and then refresh. Now when I refresh, when I press logout, it's supposed to log us out of our session. So this is to log us out. So we see that logging us out, domain, logout. So let's try to see what the problem is. So this is going to redirect us. This is supposed to be an F string. So let's try to do that. So when I go back and refresh, Now go back this side, we see that an anonymous user object has no attribute social auth. So this shows us that our current user has been logged out. So let's try to test this out in an incognito window. So when I open up an incognito window, I'm going to go to localhost 8000, and then when I log in, we are going to be redirected to the login screen of Auth0. So when I continue to my Google account, I'll be able to log in with a Google account. So I'll just put in a random Google account, and then I'll authenticate with the account. This is going to redirect me to the app, and I'll be able to access the information. So you see, hello, welcome to the application. And when I go to the profile, we have the data of the current user. In this video, we've been able to learn how to use user authentication with Auth0 and Django. If you've learned from this video, please go ahead and leave a like. Also subscribe to this channel for more content like this. See you in the next video, and thank you for watching. Bye.